Well, good morning. Good morning to you all on this clear, sunny, dry, I'm going to emphasize dry Sunday morning. Our plans were switched from hybrid to Zoom just yesterday as we were unsure what the road conditions would be like driving. And so there was, you can imagine the scuttle and the phone calls and the extra work by this wonderful team of ours at UUCR. So thank you to you all. We'll begin with ringing our Tibetan bowl as is our custom. And then we will have our first music for The Beauty of the Earth by Patty Rubin. So join me now as I ring this Tibetan bowl, listening as the sound opens our hearts to the love we can bring to each other. In this sacred gathering this morning, may the joyful find space to praise. May the inquirers feel safe to question. May the lonely find the touch of a friend. May the singers be given a tune to sing, and may the lost discover the way. And may we all experience the touch of the holy in this hour together. Well, good morning. Good morning, friends and members and visitors to the Unitarian Universalists of the Chester River. This is a church that is relevant in our lives, active in the world, and grounded in love and justice. Welcome wherever you are on your life's path, whomever you love, whatever your faith tradition, we welcome you this morning. My name is Annie Lavin, your service leader this morning. And we're pleased to welcome Annie Richards, our Chester Riverkeeper today. Riverkeepers lead our advocacy and enforcement programs worldwide. They're equally at home patrolling the rivers for illegal pollution and testifying on legislation in Annapolis. Annie comes to Shore Rivers with a lifetime of experience on the Chester and in local communities. For 10 years, she served as an educator, captain, and fundraiser at Echo Hill Outdoor School, with which many of us are familiar. Here, she also helped manage their fleet of historic Chesapeake Bay workboats. Annie has an undergrad in English literature and a minor in anthropology. Great combination. She lives just outside Chestertown with her husband, son, and Irish setter. And the four can be seen cruising around the Chester on their launch, Old Furrow. Her talk this morning is Resilient Waterways, and we look forward to hearing this. We are grateful to our sole technician this morning, John Ramsey. John, without you, there would be no service this morning, so our deep gratitude and appreciation. We have some announcements, which I'll get out of the way. The music that we had planned with Philip and Rebecca Hawk, who plays the flute so beautifully, has been rescheduled for a future service. And the very good news, of course, is that Annie Richards can still be with us this morning. The reopening committee has been meeting throughout these many months of COVID. On Thursday, they set plans for a series of reduced restrictions for COVID guidelines for our safe environment. We now have 40 chairs in our sanctuary, so we have room to welcome back those of you who may have been Zooming in the past months. Come on over to Gateway. We miss seeing you in person. And effective immediately, food and beverage may be served at special events outdoors. So next Sunday, March the 20th at 5 o'clock, come to the Memorial Woodlands as we celebrate the vernal equinox and the tradition of sock burning, fellowship, food, and drink. Also next Sunday, it's going to be a busy day. Masking both inside and outside the church will be optional. As is our tradition, we respect each individual's decision to mask or not. And really important is to, when you come into church, sign in, check off your name in the box, and that will be used for contact tracing, should we need that. A reminder that the Precious Metals fundraiser is this coming Saturday, March the 19th. You can still make an appointment to come in on Saturday between 10 and 3 to have your sterling, your gold, your coins appraised to benefit UUCR. You can contact Lynn Dollinger or Jerry Edwards to pick up your valuables or if you have questions. And lastly, we're beginning the last week of our pledge drive and we have 21% to go. So please rummage through your papers, sign the pledge, send it in. If you can't find the paper, no worries, call the office, that's covered. Your stewardship committee and all of UUCR, thanks you. And now, let us begin. For chalice lighting, we don't have our chalice, but we have the candle, which I have lit. And the words that I'd like to read to you are 110 years old. They were written by a woman, a UU, 100 years ago, Florence Emons, as a warning that has gone mostly unheeded. And she wrote, "We light this chalice to honor the orderly procession of the universe, which holds the planets in their orbits, the seas in balance, and controls the activities of microscopic cells. We light this chalice to honor the ever-changing beauty in the natural world. We light this chalice believing in the healing and restorative power of nature, but as well the lessons that we learn from nature, tenacity and purpose, patience, balance, and the inevitability of cause and effect. And finally, let us light this flame to remind us of the hope and faith that nature gives through predictable certainties, that there is light after dark, warmth after cold, peaceful calm after lashing storm, and always the miracle of the sun, the rain, and the seed." Words as important today as they were a century ago. For opening words, we go back to the Chester, and we read that all rivers run to the sea, including our beautiful Chester, all 43 miles of it, as it begins its journey in Millington, passes by Crumpton, you know I would add that, and onward to the Chesapeake and the sea. This overview, though very simple, underscores the interconnectedness of all of life, including our waters. I hesitate to call it our Chester, for that sense of ownership can too often morph from a sense of responsible care to license to do with it as we wish. Examples: building too close to the shorelines, polluting, and other destructive acts. This thinking of misinformed ownership makes me think of that famed Tottler's Law that I have read to you in the past and very much applies to us today. The author is unknown, and it goes like this. If it's mine, it's mine. If I want it, it's mine. If it looks just like mine, mine. If I had it a little while ago, it's mine. If I can take it away from you, mine. If we're building something together, all the pieces are mine. If I give it to you and change my mind later, it's still mine. If it's ever been mine, it will never be anybody else's. If it gets broken, it's yours. Today, there are signs of brokenness, and Shore Rivers reminds us of when canvasback ducks smoked up the sky. When spring was heralded by migratory fish and shad and striped bass and sturgeon, herring, and the famed blue crab. Oysters and submerged grasses were so abundant, they were considered a hazard to navigation. The Clean Water Rule was finalized in 2015, and yet polluters have been working ever since to get rid of it. Having water keepers as Annie Richards throughout the world, collaborating with a shared overview so many ignore, gives hope globally and locally as we join the fight for the health of our waters, including the Chester. And now we will have our next hymn, Peace Like a River, sung by Ampersand from UUFE. And that will be followed by our own Diane Shields, who will be leading us in a special prayer of commitment. The words will be on your screen so you can follow along or read along with her. And now for the music.
So we're very happy to be outside with all the cicadas this afternoon and enjoying doing this song that I did with the kids at Peace Camp last year. I kind of missed being with them this year, and they invented all kinds of fun verses. So we're going to do the more standard verses that you may know. Hope you'll join in. I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river in my soul. I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got love like an ocean, love like an ocean, I've got love like an ocean in my soul. I've got love like an ocean, love like an ocean, love like an ocean in my soul.
And now we're going to have our unison reading led by Diane Shields. And the words will come up on your screen.
Are you going to be able to share the words, John?
I think the screen sharing takes a second or two.
Yeah.
Are we supposed to be heard during this time?
We were going to try it, but
Okay.
if it gets a little loud, you'll notice it. So you can maybe then just say them quietly as Diane leads us.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, this is a prayer of commitment from the United Nations Environmental Sabbath Program. We join with the earth and with each other to bring new life to the land, to restore the water, to refresh the air. We join with the earth and with each other to celebrate the seas, to rejoice in the sunlight, to sing the song of the stars. We join with the earth and with each other to recreate the human community, to promote justice and peace, to remember our children. We join together as many diverse expressions of one loving mystery for the healing of the earth and the renewal of all life. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Diane.
You're welcome.
And now we come to our time of centering. Let us join together as we have this time of reflection. Meditation reminds us that we share a common journey. So let us quiet our minds, take a deep breath, become comfortable as we listen to these words by UU Minister Holly Gordon. The strength of water takes on many, many forms. Just as each of us has a unique and necessary strength with this faith community, with our families, with our world. In this moment now, drop down into the deep wellspring of your own spirit and identify the strength that is the groundwater of your person. How do you see yourself? Are you a roaring waterfall wearing rock away with sheer force of will? Or perhaps you identify as a tiny drop of water in a crevice, breaking it open slowly, steadily. Maybe you are buoyant like a great salt lake, practiced at holding others aloft. Or are you tenacious like the mountain stream, finding your way down and around every obstacle you face? Do you soothe like the steam rising from a cup of tea? Do you dissolve away stubborn muck like water left in a pot to soak? Maybe you soften and smooth the edges like a creeping fog. Or do you clear away distraction like a cleansing rain? Do you roll with the ebb and flow like ocean waters? Settle your mind upon the strength, the power that is yours alone, and draw that strength into your heart. And let us reflect in these moments together. As we gather together the many waters of this community, the many waters of our humanity, we need each of our powers, each of our resilience, each of our love to make us whole. May we use our strengths wisely. Amen. And now we have acknowledgements of the heart. We were going to be using virtual candles today. And as people say their joy or their concern, we can visualize the candle that is lit in their intention. I will light the first virtual candle. And as our tradition, we recognize each other, survivors of COVID, as well as those who have succumbed to it, the first responders and our family, friends, all of those who support us during these historically difficult times. And now I invite anyone from the congregation to signal, and we will give you an opportunity to acknowledge a joy or concern that you would like to share with the congregation.
How do we signal?
Well, I'm wondering why we don't see your picture.
I chose not to today.
Well, then we can't see you, but you can either raise your hand.
I'm sorry. All right. So you talk about non-technical. Okay. I want to, can I just say it right now? I didn't feel like combing my hair this morning. All right. So I stayed off. This is a joy related to my brother Grant, who has been in declining health since almost a year now. But the joyful thing is that he's been a car buff all his life, always taken care of at whatever car he had since about age 15. And he has decided to splurge and buy finally a dream car that I'm sure he will be in good enough health long enough to enjoy. It's a Porsche SUV, and to hear him talk about the deluxe features he's ordering and the creature comforts and everything, he's just so excited by it. And I'm so happy he decided to take this splurge.
And it's great. Thank you, Linda.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone can just put your hand up, or you can signal with the little hand at the bottom, which you may or may not know how to do. I think Nancy Holland has something.
Yes, I would just like to thank this congregation for the concern that so many people shared about the service this morning, concern about all of us as a certain age, possibly being faced with icy roads and slippery paths, and the ability and the flexibility and the commitment of people like Annie and John in particular, and our speaker and Philip and Rebecca and Darlene to convert this lovely service into all virtual at the drop of a hat. So thank you once again to all of our wonderful people who are so committed to this congregation.
Thanks, Nancy. Anyone else? Well, I will light a virtual candle in gratitude for my husband, Jim, who is watching us from Chester River Hospital, due to come home on Monday. We're grateful for that. And the last virtual candle for those joys and concerns that remain in our hearts unspoken. Let us have a moment to reflect. And blessed be. Our third piece of music is Sudden Gift of Fate, sung by Ellen Barry Grunden from UU of Easton.
Some people need to know what to expect, need to keep control, need to keep one step ahead of every chance, as if chance decides who it's gonna pass, who it will reward. They don't understand, chances don't keep score, they just find us when we're there to find. And so this has to be a sudden gift of fate. You're nothing less to me than a sudden gift of fate. It's not as if it comes down to your turn, that someone somewhere feels you've earned. You just learn to wait for sudden gifts of fate. Every word that I never thought ever would be heard. You took a long night and turned it into day. And so this has to be a sudden gift of fate. You're nothing less to me than a sudden gift of fate. It's not as if it comes down to your turn, that someone somewhere feels you've earned. You just learn to wait for sudden gifts of fate. You can celebrate, gifts are never late. You just learn to wait for sudden gifts of fate.
And now we get to the wonderful part of the service that we've been looking forward to, which will be led by Annie Richards. I believe Annie has been our river keeper for maybe a year or close to it. I read faithfully her newsletters, which are well written and full of good information, but it's really special to be able to see a face with a name and see our river keeper in person. So welcome, Annie, to UUCR and your talk this morning entitled Resilient Waterways.
Thank you, Annie. Well, thank you all so much for having me. And I see a lot of familiar names on the screen, so excuse me for preaching to the choir to some of you. And for those I haven't met, it's a pleasure to meet you. And I just hope I can stay inside 20 minutes. So I'm gonna start by sharing my screen here. So Annie is right. I have been working with Shore Rivers for a little over a year now. I came on last January. Shore Rivers is a nonprofit that is dedicated to protecting and restoring Eastern Shore waterways through science-based advocacy, restoration, and education. We are the result of a merger of 3 legacy organizations. And as a result, we have a very wide territory across the Eastern Shore. And we have over 23 employees full-time dedicated to river health. I found my way to Shore Rivers after a decade of sailing with various nonprofits and sail training organizations. So I first found my way to Chesapeake Bay Ecology and sailing on the river through Echo Hill Outdoor School. I worked for them for just under 10 years, or just over 10 years actually, seasonally and full-time. And while I was working for them, I was able to secure my captain's license and sail these beautiful boats up and down the Chester River, where we would focus on Chesapeake Bay ecology, swimming, fishing, exploring different creeks and marshes, as well as learning and studying the poetry, folklore, and stories of the Eastern Shoremen and the Chesapeake watermen that have made their living from this incredible resource for so many decades. I was also lucky enough to travel internationally, and I found myself sailing on various charter catamarans. So I worked for a family catamaran that sailed from Chesapeake to Panama City. I also, during that time, of course, went through the Panama Canal. I tagged sea turtles in the Bahamas. I sailed to, many leeward and windward islands throughout the Caribbean, met many people. It was an incredible experience. I was also able to work as a shipwrights intern on the tall ship Gazella in Philadelphia, which was the most traditional boat that I ever worked aboard, which was an incredible education. And then I was fortunate enough to work for a sailing camp called Action Quest in the British Virgin Islands. So I worked for 2 summers for this camp, where students 12 to 18 would come down and sail on a 50-foot Beneteau around the British Virgin Islands for 3 weeks, where they would learn how to sail the boat themselves. They would scuba dive, and they would learn team skills, communication, and leadership. Through that company, I also was lucky enough to work for their kind of sister program called Semester. And I was able to work on SY Argo, which was a 112-foot steel schooner, which circumnavigates the world every 4 years. And college students will sign up for 3-month semester legs. So when I worked for Semester, we had 32 students come aboard in Thailand, and we actually sailed out to the Maldives and back, stopping in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and then ending back in Thailand for a yard period. So the photo in the top right, you can see I'm in a yard. I'm actually in the Royal Thai Navy yard, where the boat was hauled for 6 months and went through an intensive yard period. So it was an incredible adventure. And, when I went through all of these different experiences, whether it was my in-depth experience on the Chester or any of these different countries, waterways that I sailed, 2 things really struck me about the experience and kept me coming back for more. And that is that everywhere I went, the common theme was how defining and life-giving the body of water was to that community, whether it was sustaining the natural ecosystem and organisms that live there, sustaining of the people and us, inspiration for art, culture, economy, and traditions. It was truly the backbone of every place that we visited. And when you're working together as a crew on a boat like this, you have no choice but to be your most authentic self. And you have so much time together, slower time, where all that matters is making the ship go forward, making sure everyone has what they need to eat, getting all of your jobs and chores accomplished. There was a camaraderie and a peace in that just inspired me to continue in that lifestyle for many, many years. And so when eventually I came back to the Chester River, it called me back, and I was working for Echo Hill for 6 years full time. And eventually I got married and had my son. It was much more difficult to have a residential job. And I was ready to take my knowledge of the Chesapeake and do something new with it. And that led me to the Riverkeepers. So last January, I joined this team of Riverkeepers, and haven't looked back. It's been an incredible experience. And I find it so easy to advocate for the Chester River because I know it so well. I spent so much of my life exploring and spending time on this one tributary that it's come so naturally to me to speak to anyone who will listen to me about the Chester and what an incredible resource it is and its worth. And so with that, a little bit about what a Riverkeeper actually does. So I'm an advocate for the Chester. That includes lobbying at the state level to help pass testimony that will improve water quality on the Eastern Shore, working with municipalities, townships, county governing bodies, to help promote better regulations for land use. I also work with various neighborhoods, communities, homeowners associations, church groups, schools, as well as individuals and volunteers to talk about how they can be better stewards of the Chester and of the land that they have control and impact on, and which will therefore benefit our ecosystem and the watershed of the Chester. I'm also a citizen scientist, and so I monitor water quality. I survey and protect oyster and SAV, which is underwater grass habitat. I test for bacteria levels throughout the summer, and we share those findings with government agencies and with the public whenever possible. I'm also involved in project outreach and education, so for restoration potential. So we have an entire restoration, agriculture and restoration department, which designs and implements incredible restoration projects across our 4 watersheds that we serve. And so I am, whenever I can, bringing projects to them and connecting them to communities, to farmers, to municipalities to see if we can put positive restoration projects in the ground to benefit the Chester. And that involves fundraising, grant proposals, creating partnerships between various other nonprofits, between municipalities and between other individuals. And then we like to communicate that success so that other people know that this is possible. So it's an incredibly rewarding job that allows me to do a lot of different things throughout the year, which is inspiring. And when I do outreach to these different communities, I always make sure that I hit these important points. That nutrient and sediment pollution is damaging our rivers. Most of that pollution in our rivers comes from within our own watershed, and restoration works. Whether that's volunteer restoration, whether that's a huge scale restoration project that we put in an ag field or within a town. And that also climate change threatens restoration and our communities. So climate change, when I speak to different communities about what runoff and what potential damaging effects are happening in the Chesapeake Bay, in the Chester River, any of our tributaries, it's easy to show a photograph like this, an image like this, to demonstrate the different land uses that are harming our waterways. We have runoff from agriculture and livestock, which is high in fertilizer and pesticides and sediment. We have urban runoff from wastewater treatment plants, stormwater runoff from pavement. We have septic systems of varying ages that may or may not be functioning. We have shortly mowed, aesthetically pleasing classic yards that essentially don't do anything to absorb runoff because there aren't native plants or tall grasses to become a buffer. So there's a lot of things that we're always combating and working with different sectors of the land to help implement restoration projects and change practices so that we can, mitigate this runoff. But what we don't talk about enough, or what I find municipalities aren't prepared for enough, is the fact that while rainwater is bringing all of this into our riverways, the river is also coming up for the land. And every year, more and more so, we are facing this reality of climate change and the effects of climate change. And we have a couple of, key factors of climate change that are going to impact the Chester River. And that is sea level rise. So as sea level rise happens, we're going to obviously have water spilling out onto land and rising and affecting, our different sectors of land in various ways. We're also going to experience heightened storm activity and increased rainfall, which when it rains, we know that that's the largest revealer of the pollution that we have on our land, and that's what's bringing it to the waterways. And then we also have a change in temperature, which is going to affect the native plants and species that we have here in our region that are natural buffers, natural solutions to help us fight the effects of climate change. So we have, these 3 main issues that are going to be impacting our waterways, over the coming decades. And how do we prepare for this? So to kind of bring it closer to home, I wanted to share with you the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's kind of GIS sea level rise viewer. So this is an image of Graysonville. So you have Graysonville, Kent Island, Prospect Bay, the Chester River, Kent Narrows. And this is where we are now. This is a GIS image of where we are now. This is the 2-year predicted image of what Kent Island and Kent Narrows will look like with 2 feet of sea rise. You can see that essentially all of the Kent Narrows portion is, incredibly affected. You can see, all of the light blue across all of these tributaries is water where there hasn't been water before. And then here's 4 feet of sea level rise. So Kent Narrows is completely underwater in this scenario. And you can see that, across a lot of these tributaries of Cox Creek, Y Mills, you can see that there's a lot of sea level rise that's going to be impacting communities that live by the waterways and live by these small creeks and streams that, connect. So here's just a zoomed in image of that 4 feet of sea level rise, which right now is the max on the scale of predicted sea level rises. This would be the max that they're predicting at the moment. So in addition to sea level rise, we're going to, a lot of folks, well, let me back up for a second. What a lot of people think about when they think of sea level rise is they think, okay, the shoreline is going to recede and the sea is going to come, the tide is going to rise and the river is going to get bigger and the water is going to come to us. But what we don't talk about is the fact that our shoreline and all of the impervious surface, the utilities, the power, all of the infrastructure that we have along our waterways isn't going to move with it. And so the shoreline is not going to move. There won't be a shoreline. And so we need to prepare for that fact. And we need to, look at how we as a community can prepare our most vulnerable areas of land for a transition like this. And it won't just be in areas where there's infrastructure, of course. And that's where I want to kind of talk to you all about marsh migration. So of course, we live in the Tidewater. We live on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake. We know that we have a lot of wetlands and marshes. It's hard to drive anywhere without seeing a small patch of Phragmites springing up somewhere because it's particularly low-lying land. And so, I apologize, this image is a little bit grainy. What I want you to take from this is the pink and dark magenta areas along these tributaries, again, on the Y River and in Kent Island area. You can see where the marsh wetlands are currently. With 2 feet of sea level rise, you can see how much they spread out into the land. And when they spread out into the land like that, you have to realize that the soil is no longer compact. It's not going to allow a septic system to function. It's not going to allow foundations of houses to continue to exist on them. Those areas will flood during periods of intense rain or, a tidal surge or, hurricanes and things like that. So you can see that the vulnerable areas of the land are going to increase as marshland encroaches into the land as a result of sea level rise. Just some facts about what has happened in the Chesapeake so far from 1910 all the way until 2000. The fact is that the Chesapeake region receives about 4.5 inches more of rain per year than it did a century ago. The length of our growing seasons have increased by more than 30 days over the last century. And that is because of our temperature rise and the amount of months in which we can have that, sustainable non-freezing temperatures, which is also impacting the types of trees and native plants that can grow here and exist here. Over the past century, we've had about 30 fewer frost days per year, and there are 30 more warm summer nights per year now than 100 years ago. So this has an impact on agriculture. This has an impact on our forests. This has an impact on native grasslands and marshes. And it also has an impact on the animal life that lives in those areas. So when I speak with municipalities, with state legislators, with towns about prioritizing resiliency, I'm hopeful that they're prioritizing resiliency so that we can, number one, be better stewards of our environment and of the Chester River, because the impact that will occur to the Chester River as a result of higher rainfall, rising seas, and warmer temperatures is undeniable. But it's also imperative that governing bodies are prioritizing ways to be more resilient against climate change because of the communities who will suffer because of that. So not only do we have these environmental hazards that will further impair our waterways, but we also have communities living usually in areas of our watershed that are disproportionately burdened by environmental hazards. So when we think of the most under-resourced and overlooked communities in our neighborhoods and in our area, they are usually residing in the lowest lying areas of our county. Therefore, they will be areas that will flood. They will be impacted by that marsh migration. They will be the ones suffering from failing septic systems and affected foundations in their homes and things like that. So this is something that we're working with municipalities and governing bodies to prioritize as much as they can, but it can be a difficult conversation because it's something that hasn't happened yet. And so here are some ways. So some ways that we work with our community and with our municipalities to start implementing restoration projects to prepare for this eventuality are as follows. One of them is river-friendly yards. So some of you may be familiar with our river-friendly yards program. This is something that we talk to homeowners about. I mean, so often in conversations after I give a presentation, I'll have someone come and say, I don't live on the water. I just have a small quarter-acre lot. What can I possibly do to help better steward the Chester River and make a positive impact? Well, everyone has a yard. And the more we can change what our ideal aesthetic is for a yard and what plants and the state of the grass, that is all going to change, runoff for the better that is headed toward the Chester River. And that, what I mean by that is all of this rain that's headed for us, whether it's, just our typical summer thunderstorms or this increasing rainstorms due to climate change, we want to slow it, we want to sink it, we want to spread it. And we can do that by implementing a lot of different things. One is to get rid of this notion that we need acres and acres of turf grass on our lawn. Currently, there's over 1.3 million acres of turf in Maryland, and over 86 million pounds of nitrogen lawn fertilizer is used to maintain that. Shortly mowed grass is essentially the same as an impervious surface in terms of how water flows across that area and heads to a waterway, taking that, fertilizer with it as it goes. But having native grass buffers with deeper roots and taller stems to slow down that body of water and allow it to sink down through the soil table is incredibly beneficial because it gives the water time to be filtered out by these roots of these native plants and then enter the creeks and streams and rivers naturally through the water table. So rain gardens, these bioretention units, are one way you can do it. This is just a nice little diagram that I like to show folks the difference in the root structures of native plants versus more kind of typical aesthetic plants that you might find in someone's yard. So we look at the black-eyed Susan, the buffalo grass, the common ninebark. You can see just how many more chances there are for a drop of rain going down through the soil table to be absorbed and filtered by the roots of those native plants. Not to mention those roots, because they're so much deeper, are holding the soil that much more compact. And therefore you're going to get a lot less sediment erosion happening during a big rainstorm. So they're so beneficial to our yards and to nearby creeks and streams. We also have bioswales. So when we look at the easements on the sides of roads, instead of just having them mowed day after, week after week by county maintenance crews, we work with municipalities to encourage establishing native plantings within these bioswales so that when water comes down into these areas, it can kind of become trapped there, sink down through the soil, and then absorbed by these plants. When we think about just letting our grass grow, this is an aerial image of Tim Trumbauer, former Riverkeeper's house. And you can see where he used to have a huge amount of acreage in mowed grass. He just decided to let his entire lawn grow. And he mowed the areas his family needed for playing, activities, hiking trails, and he kind of activated all of this space that was once unusable and was now inviting him and his family into these spaces to meander, wander through these trails. It was a lot less maintenance for him, and it became this incredibly efficient buffer for, slowing down rainwater as it headed toward Rosin Creek. So you don't have to have a lot of land to install a meadow to help. So this is another employee of Shore Rivers, Darren Tillman, our Director of Community Outreach, and she's working with her daughter. She lives in downtown Chestertown, and in their backyard, they're working to install a mini meadow. So this is something that's, again, helpful for capturing that stormwater runoff, that water, that runoff across their grass, but it also is incredibly helpful for pollinators. So introducing more pollinators and songbirds into our residential areas is, and a wonderful symbiotic, thing that we can be doing to not just improve our water quality, but our ecosystem in general. So you can see how it grew into a beautiful little meadow back there. So you can take this idea of river-friendly yards and explode it and make it much larger and talk about farm restoration. And we do this with through a partnership with Chesapeake, with the Center for Environment and Society at Washington College, and that's the Natural Lands Project. So we work with farmers to convert large swaths, huge acreages of farmland into natural grasslands where native grasses and flowering plants are established. This is to replace a huge type of habitat that really has been lost due to modern agriculture practices. And this is important for those migratory songbirds, for quail, but also incredible as a buffer for the remaining used ag land that's in rotation. If you surround your ag land with a buffer of the Natural Lands Project with these grasses, they catch that sediment runoff, that water runoff. We're able to slow it, sink it, spread it through these natural grasslands and wetlands. So part of the Natural Lands Project is also Shore Rivers brings to the table the possibility of designing wetlands for particularly low-lying areas of an ag field. We can convert that into, a natural wetland that will store that water runoff and allow the water to sink down through the soil table over time. So we also do some work with SAV restoration. So underwater grasses are incredible to help prepare our shorelines for resiliency in the face of climate change. As we think about rising sea levels, higher storms, we think, okay, we're being faced with the possibility of higher erosion on our shorelines. Well, SAV is an incredible buffer against erosion. They break up wave action, and they also catch sediment and build it back up the other way. So there's a huge amount of benefits to native underwater grasses in our rivers. And currently, Shore Rivers is going through a 2-year process to turbulate these grasses. This is funded by the Chesapeake Bay Trust. We're working with Center for Environment and Society, Anne Arundel Community College, and DNR to hopefully spread the amount of SAV habitat we have across our waterways. As I said, it's an incredible habitat for various species. It's a carbon sink. I was recently reading that an acre of SAV is actually a more efficient carbon sink than an acre of established rainforest. So it's pretty incredible. The nutrient absorbency and just aid in water clarity is undeniable. I mean, both of these photos are taken in the Chester River. And as I was out searching for these beds, I'm in 5 feet of water. You can't see the bottom. It's totally, not clear at all. And as soon as you find yourself on top of these beds, all of a sudden you can see 3-4 feet down. And the change in water clarity is it's incredible. So if you're ever out in your kayaks, out in your boats, I encourage you to go seek these beds out, take a look. If you have a motor on your boat, make sure that you're not running your propeller as you go through them. But it's incredible to see, once you find yourself on top of a well-established SAV bed, what a change to the ecosystem it can bring. So something that we do is we harvest these SAVs sustainably. So we never harvest from a bed that's smaller than a football field, and we never take more than 1/3 of what's there. We bring them back to Washington College and we turbulate these grasses. So the turbulator is essentially a large jacuzzi that we put all of this plant material into, and the jacuzzi mimics wave action and current and helps us separate the seeds from the plants, which we then hose down and clean the seeds and store them in a high salinity solution in our refrigerators over the winter. And just in the next few months or weeks, actually in the next few weeks, we'll be going out with Maryland DNR to plant these seeds in areas of the river that haven't seen SAV activity in a long time. So hopefully through this effort, we'll be able to increase the amount of acreage of grasses on our rivers. So, we also work with various municipalities to start cultivating a plan for stormwater. And part of that is what's going to happen as, sea level rise and higher rainstorm events, impact our waterways. So we know Chestertown is a beautiful historic town that was designed 300 years ago to shed water into the Chester River as quickly as possible, because that's how you got rid of all of your garbage. And now we have to figure out how to implement strategies to stop that, because we know that we don't want water shooting down High Street like a class 5 rapid into the Chester River. We want to slow it down. So we're working with, Chestertown to, establish more mature canopies through, throughout their impervious surface areas, disrupt impervious surface wherever possible, and install green infrastructure. So those bioswales that I mentioned in the river-friendly yards, different bioretention units, all of that can be implemented at a town scale, a city scale, to help absorb that, runoff from impervious surface. And then, of course, to focus those efforts on the areas of town, the areas of our counties where we have communities that will be disproportionately affected by this increased rainfall and sea level rise. So the most important thing that I want you all to take away from this, when we look at those charts of sea level rise and we talk about its impacts, it can feel hopeless sometimes, and it shouldn't. We need to be stubborn optimists in the face of this. And everyone who contributes their time and their resources towards finding a solution for the Chester, being stewards of their own watershed, it all adds up to make a huge difference. And these are some ways that you can, act for a resilient future. So planting that river-friendly yard, you can foster spat with Marylanders Grow Oysters. Oyster reefs are also an incredible buffer for sea level rise, helpful for breaking up that wave action and reducing erosion, and of course, wonderful for water quality. Become a trained tree steward. We have a new volunteer program where we train members of the community on soil and tree health and biology and how to assess an area for a tree planting project. So you can become a trained tree steward. And advocate for climate resilience in your local community. I mean, it's my job to go out and stand up and talk, to Queen Anne's County, Kent County, state delegates about the importance of these things, but it means a lot when citizens like you get up and say the same thing. So you don't have to be a professional to make your voice heard on these matters and make it count. And then become an SAV watcher is also a great one. So while we have a volunteer program where folks can go out on their kayaks, find SAV beds, document them on a data sheet, send us the coordinates. And then once we've confirmed those coordinates and logged them with the Chesapeake Bay program, they become a protected area for 5 years, which is so important because it protects, clammers can't dredge in that area, docks can't be built over that. So there's a lot of, really important work that each and every one of us can be doing to help the Chester River and, collectively the waterways of the Eastern Shore. So if you have any other questions about volunteer opportunities, my contact information is up here. And, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Richards at shorerivers.org.
Yeah.
Okay. So at this time, perhaps, John, we could go back to the general screen. And if anyone has any questions for Annie, forget the suggestions. Any thoughts that you'd like to add to this? This is your opportunity to do so. So just indicate and we'll call on you.
Hey, John.
Sydney?
Yes. Hey, thank you, Annie, very much for being with us this morning. And regarding the sea level rise, 2 to 4 feet, Over what time period are we talking about?
We're talking, those projections are over 50 and 100 years.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Linda. I have a
Linda Weimer?
question. Yes, I had a couple questions. I've heard of a number of those native plants that you mentioned, but I hadn't heard of what was it, a grass that was called drop seed?
Yes.
What was the full name of it, please?
Prairie dropseed, I think.
Is it possible to buy either of them? I have never seen them. I go to, I do a lot of gardening, and I'm trying to be more native oriented, but I don't remember ever seeing those plants in a garden center. How does one go about? I mean, it is much faster to get the plant versus the seeding of an entire yard by yourself is kind of overwhelming. So how could we get prairie drop seed?
So I would definitely just speak with, so we have a list on our River Friendly Yards page of our website. We have a list of various landscapers and nurseries that we often work with. And we actually even offer rebates to folks who are purchasing native plants from those areas. But if you go to the Mill at Kingstown or Unity, you can call them and just talk to them about native plants. And if there's one that you want that they don't have, oftentimes they can bring it in for you. And so they're usually incredible resources for the types of native plants that you're looking for.
Thank you. One more question. Do we have, early in your introduction, you talked about swimming, and it occurred to me, I don't know of any actual beach where it's possible for the public to go swim in the Rochester River. Is there such a place?
So it's a very interesting question that you bring up. So that's a whole nother segment of my work at Shore Rivers, is working with counties to improve public access. So across the 85 miles of shoreline we have on the Chester River, we only have 12 DNR recognized public access points. 10 out of 12 of those are just boat ramps with a small parking lot. So what that tells us is that unless you own your own car and you own your own boat, you won't be recreating in the Chester River. And so we do need more beach access. And while Conquest Beach on Spaniard's Neck in Queen Anne's County is a beautiful large sand beach, it's currently not being advertised by the county as a swimming beach. And Mattapeak was another beach in Queen Anne's County that was a swimming beach and has recently changed status because essentially they were being overwhelmed by crowds from COVID, and rather than directing more resources to it, they just shut it down. So that's something that we spend a lot of time advocating for, is how can we get more ways for all different communities to access the water, whether that's fishing, swimming, boating, etc.
Okay.
It's a good point that you bring up.
Hey, Marcy Ramsey.
Hi, Annie. I'm an old fan of yours.
Yeah, likewise.
You did a wonderful job, just a wonderful job. My question is about SAVs. My grandson and I have been out in a kayak and have noticed that it's changed over the last couple of years. 2 or 3 years ago, we were seeing great mats of, he calls it Godzilla, but it's hydrilla and wild celery. And I haven't been seeing that lately, and especially right off here in the Upper Chester. So what are you seeing because Chester was coming back great guns with SAVs, and then I'm not hearing that anymore. So what's happening?
Yeah. So are you kind of referring to the area around Crumpton that had, huge swaths of wild celery?
Yes.
Yeah, so those, I have not seen those since I've become when I was just a citizen recreating in the waterways, I remember them being there. And since my time as riverkeeper, they have not been there. And so there's a couple of reasons that can contribute to that. Usually it's storm activity. So if we have incredibly wet springs, that can, often impact the turbidity of the water for so long that the seeds are never able to germinate. And then, rise up. what I can say is that these seeds from various SAV, whether it's wild celery, whether it's redhead grass, once they, successfully fall off the plant and settle down into the soil, they can lay dormant for up to 5 years, which is why these beds are protected for up to 5 years. So, even though they haven't been there the last 2 years, if we have a different spring this year, the conditions change, there's no reason to think that there's not a possibility that they could come back.
It's like they're not going to have a spring this year, if you ask me.
Yeah, I know.
So cold today.
So we'll see how it goes here, but I know
Thanks. That's a good explanation.
Well.
Yeah. And if we start seeing it come back, we'll let you know.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question or something to comment on right now?
Yeah, I would like to ask, and they grow oysters in the lower Chester. At what point on the Chester is it no longer feasible? I mean, how far up the Chester can you go and grow oysters?
So it's tough. So for the Marylanders Grow Oyster Volunteer Program, oysters require a certain salinity to reproduce. And then they also need a certain salinity to survive, and they're different salinities. So an oyster can survive in like 8 parts per thousand, but it's not going to reproduce in 8 parts per thousand. It needs really 12 to 15 to reproduce. And so with that, there's a range obviously throughout the season that salinity is going to change on the river based on spring, summer, fall. Usually, higher than Camp Pacomath, you're kind of getting into territory where it's not going to be worth it for us to hang oyster cages. They're just not going to grow fast enough that we'll feel comfortable throwing, because what happens is when you volunteer for MGO, you get a cage with new spat that have struck onto clean oyster shell. You hang them off your dock, shake them every once in a while to keep them clean. And then after 9 months of growing on your dock, they've grown to maybe about the size of a quarter or something like that. And they're then big enough, strong enough that we plant them on sanctuaries in the Corsica and in Langford. But if they're much fresher than that, they don't grow enough that they don't die, but they also don't grow enough that we want to plant them. So usually Camp Pacomath is kind of my cutoff.
Understood.
Yep.
Anyone else? Okay, John, I think I'd like to do the closing words now, and then maybe after that we could go to our favorite song of all time, Spirit of Life, which is sung by All Souls Choir. It's a wonderful presentation. But for the closing words, I found these that I've used before, written by Jacques Cousteau. And he said, "This is our hope, that the children born today and in the future have a bit of green grass under their bare feet, a breath of clean air to breathe, a patch of blue water to sail upon, and a whale on the horizon to set them dreaming." And so with these words, then we can go into Spirit of Life.
There's
Before I extinguish the chalice, I would just like to thank again Annie and John and Diane and each of you who were with us this morning. This service, as all of our services, are recorded so that you can see them again, and for those who weren't able to be with us at this time this morning. So I extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. And now our sung benediction. Our postlude is Take Me to the River, sung by Al Green. And blessings to you all, and have a wonderful week.
I'd like to dedicate this song to little Junior Parker, a cousin of mine that's gone on, but we'd like to kind of carry on in his name by saying, I don't know why I love you like I do, after all the changes that you put me through. Used all my money and my cigarette,